Credit union
Can you hear me now?
versus
I can just speak louder.
the federal FDIC.
And credit unions also do
How about now? Is that better?
overnight loans. So
I'm looking at the audio guy behind you.
they do overnight loans between banks and they.
Is that better now? Can you hear me?
So I guess that's one.
All right, sounds good. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Scott Brokaw. I'm from IBM. I run the product team in our data and AI division. On behalf of IBM, I just want to welcome you to the Data Dividend. We love these type of events because it brings data industry leaders together. It allows us to talk about the common problems that we're all facing and trying to battle across. I think when we think about data modernizations or digital decision making, this is about people, process, and technology. And sometimes we forget to kind of talk more openly about the people and process sides of things and kind of the real issues that we face. One thing that of course, all the hype in the market right now around generative AI is, I'm sure we're going to talk quite a bit about it at length in some of the panels. Just to share some of IBM's point of view with you, we think that first, kind of foundationally, you have to establish a data architecture. You have to establish a foundation of which you can build onto with whether it be analytic products or AI projects. So having a common understanding of how that data is represented across the enterprise, how it's governed, how you track relative data quality, how you understand provenance and lineage of the data. This is all foundational for how you ultimately can use that upstream. The more and more that you can push that kind of management practice of data to the end consumers, the less it becomes kind of a headache or kind of a burdensome. The second pillar that we talk about a lot is not having to emphasize just a single model. So I think when at the end of the day, when you look at some of the generative AI use cases, everyone gets kind of focused on a singular large model. And while that's cool, and some of the use cases that you can do with it are very, very broad, what we find for business use cases, having small targeted models actually make a lot more sense. You don't need to ask for, I was sharing earlier in the roundtable, you don't need to ask your HR chatbot to write you a poem. Right? And so having a more targeted use case that allows you to kind of have data that's trained on a particular problem statement not only becomes easier to host, but it becomes easier to maintain and easier to track the type of data as well. And then the last point and the last pillar is trust. And this is trust not just from a regulatory compliance perspective of bias, is the model drifting, how do I trust the decision that's actually making, but it's actually getting onboarding into how does the business start to apply what you're doing in AI. So whether that's getting them to onboard and convince them that you're not really trying to take away their job, right? It's not automation in that respect, but more of the kind of realm of assistance, right? How are we going to empower our teams to be more productive? And how are we going to ultimately augment the knowledge that's in their head to allow them to do their jobs more productively? So welcome to the conference here. Really looking forward to the panels. I encourage you guys all to be open, share your expertise, share what hasn't worked as well. It's great to learn from each other and collectively try to push the industry forward. So again, thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone, and welcome again. I am Sarah Rapucci. I will be moderating our first panel and kicking us off this morning. I am the global head for research programs at Economist Impact, and we are very grateful to IBM for sponsoring this event with us today. I want to thank all of you for being here in person, but also thank you to our virtual audience. The program is being live streamed today. So we all know, of course, that data is everywhere in the world right now, and that companies have large quantities of data that they aren't always certain how to leverage in order to benefit the enterprise as a whole. There are a lot of benefits to harnessing data assets. That can be enhanced innovation, optimized value chains, faster market penetration, and also better decision making. But there's also a lot of challenges. And Those can be everything from the rapid flow of information and the challenges in keeping up with it, the changes in regulation that we're all seeing every day, and of course, standard governance issues that we've been facing for a long time with data quality and data protection. So to take full advantage of the data, companies need to have the right people, they need to have the right strategies, and they need to have the right tools in place. With that in mind, we're here to discuss what data means for the modern enterprise, to talk about some of the challenges and also some of the solutions that our panelists will bring and also that all of you have been seeing. We'll talk about how data can be collected, how it can be traded, and how it can be used to improve business performance. And we'll talk about the lessons learned about how data can be used efficiently and how it can be leveraged to be more resilient against future shocks. So with that, I will invite our first panel up to the stage, and we will dig in. So those of you who are joining me, please come up to the stage. Just going to rearrange.
Thanks.
I'm going to make sure I can see all of you. So this is our first panel. It's on taking advantage of data in difficult economic times. I am very pleased to welcome our panelists up here. Scott Brokaw, you've just met, is the Director of Product Management for IBM Data, AI, and Automation for IBM Software. Niru Arora is the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Alliant Credit Union. And Michael Baker is the Vice President for Advanced Analytics, Data Platforms, and Strategy for the Chamberlain Group. Thank you all for being here. Our discussion will be about how companies can use data to address economic challenges and other forms of volatility. We've all seen the impact of rising inflation as well as global economic and also political instability. And many companies are seeing fragile supply chains, more distributed workforces, and shifts in customer expectations. Data and analytics leaders are being called on to help businesses respond to these changes and to make better and faster decisions. So we will be talking first about data-driven decision-making. Then we'll dig in a bit on how to build good data strategies. And then we'll talk a bit more specifically about data and how it can help us respond to volatility. Scott, I will start with you. You lead business and technical strategy for IBM. Can you give us an overview of how you think that data can be leveraged to make better decisions?
Absolutely. So I think, as I was kind of talking about in my opening remarks, I think when you think about any type of data-driven organization, you have to start with a foundation of what it is that you have. And so a lot of the times when we work with clients, they have a whole myriad of data that's spread across the enterprise, typically very siloed in terms of different business units or different ownerships of where that data actually resides. So first, just trying to discover what it is that's actually there and how that can then be utilized upstream is kind of the key first step. Looking at kind of governance as a discipline versus a kind of audit or regulatory requirement. You're thinking about how do I understand how fresh a data asset is, how where that data asset was actually originated from, what type of access policies need to be in place. These are things that can start to help unlock how you start to promote consumption and ease of use of that data. I think one of the most common things questions that I get is how someone should start, right? How should you start governing data or figuring out of the hundreds and hundreds of data sets that I have, where do I start in terms of the place that's going to have the most impact? We typically recommend that you look at kind of the lineage of how is the data already consumed in your enterprise? So you can start to walk back and say, well, of the data that's actually existing, I know that this is active in a bunch of business reports or data science models that are being trained today, right? And so this is the way that I can kind of hone in on what are the hot spots for me to try to focus on and ensure that I have kind of the largest benefit for us to start to govern. So when I think about this problem, I think about how you set the foundation for which the organization can ultimately build on, whether it's analytics or AI building or other types of downstream use cases. That data foundation is really, really critical to organizations to get started with.
Michael, at Chamberlain Group, you integrate IoT technology into a lot of your products. Tell us a bit about the data implications of gathering all of that data and how you have leveraged it for data-driven decision making.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Sarah. So at Chamberlain, some of you may know us from garage door openers. We have the LiftMaster brand. And over the past number of years, we've developed and implemented a MyQ ecosystem that allows people to control their access points wherever they are in the world. So we have about 10 million users that have the MyQ app on their phone. And with that comes, as you said, a lot of data, a lot of IoT data. And so one of the things that we have certainly been focused on in the past several years is how do we build the right data foundations, as you were saying, Scott, to make sure that we can ingest that data, store that data, govern that data, and then obviously make it available for valuable use cases that can serve our customers. So an example of that is with our application, obviously it's evolving. We always want to test and learn and understand what features in our app are working. And so by being able to really ingest that data, to look at it in close to real time, we're able to deploy new features after a sprint and then determine within a matter of hours, within a few days, what seems to be really working and not working, and then be able to kind of pivot from that. Now that's certainly a journey. We still have a ways to go on that journey, but certainly getting to a place where we're able to provide our customers more value, a better experience in the app, and then the services kind of that we're building on top of that app have been critical for us. And data is at the center of all of that, which is why the Chamberlain Group has invested a lot in the data and analytics area, both centrally as well as really building the talent across the organization to make data-informed decisions. But it's a journey that we're all on, I think. So.
I'm just smiling. Prior to Alliant,
Jump right in, Nira.
I was with Volkswagen.
Okay.
So one of the CarNet apps that integrates with garage opening from your Volkswagen car is the Chamberlain garage door.
Yes.
Just to bring it to life.
Yeah. As well as Tesla and Mercedes and Honda and Acura. I'm just here to plug things. Right?
Yeah. IoT. Network.
So Nira, now you're at a credit union. Tell us from the perspective of a financial institution how you're looking at data-driven decision making.
Yes, so different ways of looking at, obviously we talked about economics times, right? So interest rates, climate, and where the financial markets are going is on top of our minds. So I'm with the credit union, so on top of our minds are always our members. But the current times really, I was saying with my data team is follow the dollar and follow the data. So when you think about it, is the 3 C's that are really on front of my mind is our chief risk officer, our chief financial officer, and our chief CD officer. So starting with the risk officer, if you're thinking about, how do we make money and how does money walk into our 4 walls and how do we, spend money, it's really is about, if you think about underwriting, what loans are we going to underwrite, what's the risk appetite for the firm, and how are we doing financially, that's on top of our mind. And then it also, when you look at the economic climate, we have to recover our loans as well to prevent losses. So our collection model, so our recovery is on top of our mind. So from risk, it's underwriting to recovery to payment to the members. And then our partnership with CFO is really around looking at our data from the kind of, what's the book balance we have, and how do we make sure we're adjusting our product offerings to our members in a thoughtful way, as well as managing our books, our assets, liabilities in a thoughtful way. So this is, spanning across the entire treasury functions, if you would. With the digital officer, as climate changes, the consumer behavior changes, the members, right? So people need to access their money in different ways for different things. So we are also partnering very much at looking at our member data and what's within our four walls, and also looking at the competition. What are the products that will help the members during this difficult time? So it's really is about meeting the members where their needs are and launching products, whether it's saving products or emergency saving products, in a speed to market sort of way.
I love what you said there too, because I think that so often we think of data strategies as this like IT-centric driven thing, right? But in reality, for them to be successful, you need to create more of a data culture at the company, right? And so in onboarding all of those different business units and stakeholders as part of what you're doing is so important to actually allowing it to be successful. It's no sense in building a data architecture or data management system that isn't going to be utilized by the business, right? So having that feedback loop and communication of everyone involved is so important.
Absolutely. And this is where, because data is this big, so data is everywhere, focusing on where the value creation, value addition, loss prevention, it really allows us to go deeper on the data quality, data governance in things that matter, right? There's a lot of data, but and don't quote me on the numbers, but right now, at any given moment, there's certain data that's really is going to bring the value with urgency and immediacy, so we double down on that, and then we move on to the next thing, but always focusing on the foundation. So I cannot underestimate the first thing you said, is that if your data supply chain, your data pipelines are not solid, and you can't trust that supply chain, any model you build on top of it, analytics, if it's constantly questioned, then the value is also questioned, right? You'll make wrong decisions. So I think that foundation is just so important, and we are acutely focused on that.
Yeah, just to build on it briefly. The foundation is critical, having the right level of access, the right level of trust in the data, and then having a talent across the organization is critical, really, because the speed of decision making, you can bring certainly model results, insight, but the insights leading to action, that typically has to be kind of at the edges. And so really being able to drive that, as you said, in terms of kind of a data culture is critical in terms of being able to move with the speed that's necessary.
Michael, can you say more about that, about the types of people or skills that you need to have in place and how you build that culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think initially, when we started at Chamberlain, it was about building a centralized organization of data scientists, data engineers, all with kind of a business mindset. And I think we've had good success in kind of building that, making sure we've got the right foundation and centralized talent. As I think about how companies need to continue to evolve, it really is about having people across the business units and functions that are going to have the data skills to interpret data, to really leverage it for those decisions. And so, we're creating new job profiles that really have still a mix of business talent and technical talent, but maybe shifting the balance a little bit to more of a business focus, but certainly still having a stronger technical focus in those business roles. And so that's been kind of a critical focus across the organization, making sure we've got the right job profiles really in every part of the company.
Yeah. I can build on that. We have deliberately sort of kept the engineering talent in a centralized organization. So whether it's running data ops, data engineering, building the data supply chain, but very deliberately kept the data usage, the data analysts within the business units. So we work very closely to them. So the engineers are sitting adjacent to the operating units, but the democratization of that data, so it's built for you, about you, by you, is very, very important. So that's one. So it was a very deliberate decision in really saying that we're in this together. So the partnership sitting next to each other. It is bringing focus on data governance as well, because what comes out you have to trust, and the decision, for decision making. What we are doing on top of this is really on these acute cases, sort of starting a governance on what we call business value creation, where the C-suite comes together on a monthly basis to talk about, there's that business as usual stuff that has to go on. You have your diagnostic data that's used either from your centralized data warehouse or within your systems of record. But then there's that business value creation where how do we really launch a new product? So that's a new discipline we started with the data scientist team at the table, so we can test the new hypothesis and build a supply chain for them. So, and I think now, the citizen developers, the low code, no code, we are having to think about how does data live within our engineers, because, being able to interpret, what is being asked for and deliver it in a faster speed. So there's a series of education that's going to go to our engineers so they can understand the business and partner better. So,
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about that too, so I've seen companies do both. I've seen the centralization of kind of IT resources. I've also seen companies try to take IT resources and put them in the business, right? But I think no matter what the organizational structure that you come up with, as long as you have a squad of personas that are ultimately trying to make up, not just the technology, but the requirements, the regulatory compliance, the auditing and risk, like how you bring that all together in a cohesive group to actually form a product. I think that's where you can actually start to break through. I've seen companies that actually try to do that from an organizational construct to try to break through some of those hesitancies sometimes that are in all of our corporations. But I think the other element out of all this is not just how an organization is shaped or the skills that are there, but it's if we really truly mean we want to democratize data access, like what does that mean and what do we have to do to be able to enable that? So for instance, like what would it mean if we enabled the business to just self-service access the data? Well, it means that we're going to have the proper automatic rules built into the access tool itself so that they don't need to worry if they are allowed to be accessing a particular data set. It's just enforced by the tool, right?
Exactly.
And so you're allowing the tool to kind of work for you in terms of the processes that you want in the organization, and that is what can sort of actually promote some of these behaviors and consumption patterns that we all ultimately want to get towards. But yeah, so I think it's an interesting balance of how you mix organizational structures with kind of the desire to try to be more business driven towards the ultimate requirements that are driving the technology.
Scott, I love this. Oh,
Sorry, yeah, just because I agree with what's been said. I mean, it makes a lot of sense that that at the end of the day, I mean, whether something is centralized, whether it's decentralized resources, everyone needs to be kind of rowing in the same direction, which is toward bringing value to our customers, right?
Exactly.
And so. So even as we think about like the centralized function of data and analytics and data engineering, as you were saying, ultimately we want them to still be focused on what is the product that they are supporting and really helping to produce. And so when it comes to our video product, we have engineers that are dedicated to the data around that, and similarly with our partnerships and delivery services and things like that. And so everyone thinking about what is that North Star of the value creation, as we were kind of talking about at the roundtable, is critical. Yeah.
I want to push on this topic you brought up about the democratization of access to data. And I'm wondering, Michael and Nira, whether this speaks to your experience at all, whether you have suggestions in that area of how we can get more access to data.
You want to go first?
So it used to be, so just, democratization of the data doesn't mean everybody can have access to the data warehouse. So I have this saying with my team, as just, I don't know if when you go back, just ask your teams, how many people have access to the data warehouse? So what happens with that behavior is I come, get the data, I take it, and then I transform it, I enhance it, I do something to it, I translate it on my local drive. That is not democratization of data for me. That is like not what I like to promote.
Let me guess, Excel,
in
right?
this- Yes, yes. And then Excel, and then you never contribute back to the centralized source of truth.
Yep.
So democratization for us is really building the right data supply chain, right data marts that are fit for purpose for a operating unit, for a team, for things that they need to do. So it's a trusted, curated data set that they can use. They don't have to cleanse, they don't have to go where it comes from. They align to the definition. And what it is doing is it's not only giving them, like now you sort of bring in the Gen AI and other things, so it's giving me what I need. It's my dashboard for what I need to do to make the business decision in speed to market. So now we're sort of democratization means how can I give you diagnostic at your fingertip anyway, but then looking at modern tools, what can I do to give you prescriptive and even bring the Gen AI into so that we are constantly sort of always on and working on the next hypothesis. So democratization means that it's fit for purpose for what a business unit or an individual team needs.
Yeah, and I would just kind of build and echo some of that. I mean, I think it is about having common data sets or data products that can be used for, a myriad of use cases. I think one of the challenges that a lot of companies face, Chamberlain, as we've expanded in the IoT area, is you can easily end up with a lot of individual kind of bespoke kinds of data sets that serve individual use cases. And so by having data products that are curated, as you said, really well defined with kind of the business definitions, the business rules, that is, I think at the end of the day, the only way that you really build a strong foundation that people can, commonly leverage that data and get to the same answer rather than being in a meeting and fighting that one number is different than another number, right? And so that focus on the data products, which I think is building on that kind of raw data foundation, is critical too.
Yeah, this is a concept we've been hearing a lot about as well, is like you don't build a product for one use case or for one user, right? When you're building a product, you're setting out to try to fill what is the common requirement, and you're getting stakeholders that are giving input into that too. But product implies ownership, right? It implies that someone's maintaining the asset. It means that there's a life cycle around its creation and its maintenance, right? And so I think it's an important point. And I think this is one of the things where centralization actually does benefit, right? Like you do want to have some common source of what the truth really should be, so that as it's kind of consumed downstream, you don't have all these different copies of the same data set that are sitting in Excel notebooks on someone's desktop, right? Exactly. So I think that even in IBM, like we've struggled this with tons of data that we have across our enterprise. Like we try to focus on having a single dashboard for all of my product managers as an example, right? So that they have access to all the sales data, all the usage data, so that they can make data-driven decisions about how we're running our products, right? But if every product team was to maintain that separately, IBM's a rather large company, you can imagine all the different copies of data that we would ultimately have. And so centralization, I think, does play a role in terms of one way that you can start to solve some of those problems, but yet still allow kind of a broader audience to be able to communicate and work with it.
I'd love to talk a bit about data strategies. I know, Neero, you've built a comprehensive data strategy for Alliant. Tell us some of the insights that you've gained from that experience.
So we are, you're always in the process of building a data strategy. It's never done. What we are focusing on is building sort of a roadmap, every organization is at a different point in leveraging different technologies. As a digital bank, credit union, let's just not call us a bank, a digital credit union, data is very, very important. It's the other twin. So we are really starting ground up. So we've got 5 pillars of our strategy. Fixing the foundation. I cannot underestimate that. It's not just fixing the foundation. There's a foundation that exists. It's really starting to think about what you need from your core systems, what you need from what is within your house, and then what data do you need that's from your partners. So it's It's about quality, it's about completeness, it's about really building that trusted foundation. So we have a roadmap for that. Then on top of that comes, how are you engineering? How are you building the supply chains? So, I'm sure the world is, as we think about our integrations with our fintech partners, and other partners where we rely on their data. So it's really building the right supply chain that's very tightly integrated with our API-led strategy. So it's real-time data. When do we cache it? How do we make it available? So it's really focusing on data engineering and building that right toolkit that will allow us to leapfrog. Yeah. So we're not only looking at Gen AI for business use cases, we are partnering with our tech partners like Microsoft and others to say, well, how can I use Gen AI to leapfrog the foundation, right? Why are we doing master data management the way we've always done it? What can Gen AI do to dedupe the data in a faster way, in a real-time way, so that the data governance can be made easy? So we're really sort of thinking about data engineering and supply chain management with the modern toolkit in mind. Then on top of that comes data governance and then federation of data. So we have kind of coupled that together, which is something new, democratization, because people who are the team that's going to go around to the business units about governance, they are best positioned to democratize and evangelize the data set for them and show them the value. So that's something different. In the past, we kind of had that separate. So we're combining that function together. We're just starting that journey, but so far it's looking promising, because now it's not just you're doing data governance, you're doing data value add with the same team. Let me teach you how to use Power BI. Let me teach you how to use Tableau. By the way, do you need both of them? Right? So start having meaningful conversation, and I think it's going really well for us. Then on top of that, we put data science and deliberately sort of separating large learning models from it, because data science for us, given that we're a financial institution, is coming from a lot of structured data. So we really need to stay on top of it for our risk models, our financial models, our asset models, the treasury functions. So that stays separate. And then we just sort of introduce the large learning models, which is how can we take the structured with the business value creation team, and what if we added some unstructured data to it? What use cases arrive? And there we're having a lot of fun. We've got like a 3x3. I just facilitated a session with our business last Thursday with our chief digital officer, our CFO, our chief risk officer, and our data science team on what are the Gen AI use cases that would create us value. And it was quite interesting that after we're done with the exercise, we were like, okay, how many are really Gen AI, or how much are really our AI ML on structured data?
AI, yeah.
And 80% of them are still under the structured data, AI ML. So we are managing the Gen AI, sort of separating the large learning models. So that's serving us well. We've got a couple of use cases in it in our customer support area, and how can we better enable our search on our .org and on .com sites. But there's much discussions to be had, because you got to fix the basics and get professional with what you have, where the value is, and then we go chase the shiny star. So it's sort of 5 elements.
I think, a good data strategy is one that works for you, right? And so it allows you to have your teams actually interacting with how you're storing and managing data, right? So like a concept that we've been looking at a lot is, can we build an assistant on top of effectively the data architecture, right? So you can start to ask questions of what type of data I have, how you start to merge kind of the business understanding with the technical metadata understanding, and to create kind of this semantic layer that allows you to have kind of more of a conversational style, kind of exposed above your data state, right? And I think that starts to unlock like all the hard work and the effort that we've been putting in over these years to be able to unlock those type of use cases. But you're absolutely right. Like, not every use case is a Gen AI use case. Not everything needs generative, right? Like, some of it, traditional AI, especially for results that you need the same thing. The joke, I think, in the roundtable was, if you're computing a grade, you don't want that grade to be different the second time, right? Like, you need it to be deterministic in some sense. And so, when you look at content generation, when you look at code generation, when you look at summarization, like these are all really powerful assistant ways to look at how you can bring generative AI into what your teams are doing, because it starts to give them superpowers, right? It gives them the ability to kind of act faster, move faster, get frameworks of kind of how things should look, versus kind of making a predictive decision is a little bit more outside the scope of kind of a design time versus a runtime. So, but yeah, really interesting.
Do you want me to build on that? Okay.
Go for
so, yeah, so our data strategy just briefly focuses on kind of 4 areas. One of them is data access, which encompasses quite a bit of what you've been talking about. It's about really making sure we're collecting the right data, that people have the right access to it, that we have the right tools to leverage it, that are accessible to people across the organization. The second pillar is really kind of trust in that data, which is really all about the governance and making sure that the documentation is there and all of those things. The third element is around the talent, and that's an area we've been especially focused on. One of the things we've done over the past year is launched an analytics community of practice across the organization, which really does bring together kind of about 300 people that have a significant portion of their work that is related to data and analytics, so that we can have this network of people that can share experiences, share knowledge about the data, about different methodologies and approaches. And so that's been a major focus for us on the talent piece. And then finally, making sure that we have the right ability to leverage advanced techniques, advanced models, with our data science team, and bring those to value, whether that's for internal decision making, or embedded in some of our products with optimization, algorithms that can help to make sure that facilities are running efficiently, for example.
So let's talk a bit about responding to volatility and economic challenges. Neera, I'm curious from your perspective how data insights can help a company, or how you have seen it help Alliant respond to some of those issues of inflation, supply chain risks, political volatility, and so forth.
So for us, I mean, it's just recent day, just with what's happening with the economics condition, we are very, I said it, we're very acutely focused on our recovery right now. Because, as a credit union, our value to our members is what we pay back in higher interest rates and higher dividends. So therefore, for us to make sure that the loans and the things that we have given out that earn us money, that we can recover on them. So it's really been on asset recovery. And I would say that team very quickly, anytime there, has put an excellent model that not just sort of is with what's within our 4 walls, but also how are some of our servicing partners are doing, and then monitoring their performance, and then constantly bringing those business insights at a risk committees meetings to make sure that we are acutely focused on that side of the business. The other side of the business is obviously underwriting, which is huge for us. And this is where you figure out, how do you grow? Can you take a little more risk even though the market is, turmoil? So how do you keep that asset and liability balance in check? That again, I'm very proud of my team as to how quickly the data is curated, and the speed to which we're bringing the decisions to the forefront to our various committees. So this is reaction.
Michael, you're in manufacturing, very different industry. How have you used data?
So fortunately, we've had no volatility at all. Somehow we have completely, it's like we're in a vacuum. But yeah, I mean, I think that certainly, I mean, the world we live in, there's a lot more volatility than I think we've seen for a long time. And so helping, particularly with our hardware business, the manufacturing part of our kind of traditional business of manufacturing and putting onto the market new operators, garage door operators, and other devices. Knowing where that business is going has been much more influenced by macroeconomic conditions than historically. And so if we think about housing starts, inflation, interest rates, all of those things kind of combine to, to help to bring to bear some view on, where we think the business is going to be going over the next several years, and therefore, what level of investment we can make as we're transforming our business with building new services. And so when it comes to the new services, anytime a company is transforming and building something that hasn't been built before, it means there will be volatility and uncertainty. And so I think on that part of the business, we've been able to kind of help navigate to understand, how new products are performing and how new services and features are performing more quickly, so that we can then, pivot where necessary. And so those are a couple of the ways that my team and the organization as a whole has kind of been embracing and leveraging data to make decisions a little bit faster in our core business and then in our emerging services businesses.
We have just a minute left. I'm going to pose a question for each of you to answer, which is, what do you see as the most exciting opportunity in this new frontier? And if you say Gen AI, please be more specific. Exactly what is it that's so exciting? Scott, I'll start with you.
I think that the hype of Gen AI is going to bring a renewed focus on data and data management. And so I think for me, if you think about the hype cycles and the different patterns that we see in industry, it's more about the focus and the understanding that people are starting to realize that truly the data that you have, the data insights that we have, is what's going to set us apart. Every single company is a data-driven company now, or trying to be, right? That's why we're all here, right? And so it's no longer being data-driven or using data in your processes doesn't alone set you apart. It's the actual data and the management of that data and how you use that data. So I think for me, what excites me is the hype of Gen AI and kind of people think about the potential of what's possible, the art of the possible, and you can start to think through how that then has downstream effects on what everyone else is doing too.
Yeah. Similar, I think for me, I am really looking for that scale when the intersection of structured and unstructured sort of comes together at scale in a very rudimentary, useful ways, right? Where I can ask a question without having to train it for hours, right? So it's about me for me. I'm really excited about that opportunity.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that I'm pretty excited about. One is, I think the Gen AI and other kind of technologies will enable people that maybe traditionally haven't been able to leverage data as much, that haven't been wearing a data and analytics hat per se, to actually get insights faster. And so one of the things that I've already been excited about is to be able to see people that have traditionally not coded, but now are dipping their toes and maybe a little bit more than that into those waters, and with the help of Gen AI types of assistance. There's more that needs to come with that, and that's the data literacy. It's really being able to interpret it. It's knowing that you're not always going to get an accurate result out of certain models there. But that's been exciting for me to see how that can help us to really scale and really bring people into the data and analytics tent that haven't been there as much in the past. The second thing is, as a company, we're investing a lot more in bringing advanced analytic capabilities to our products themselves, with image recognition, in some of our video devices, and with I mentioned before some of the optimization at warehouses and facilities, and bringing those advanced models that actually directly make the lives of our customers better, makes access simpler for them, and obviously creates value for the company and strengthens that relationship with the customers, are all really things that I'm quite excited about to see in the data and analytics space.
There's really so much potential here, and it's really exciting. And I think, I always love coming back to this point about how we're empowering people to own their own data and to use it in new ways. And I think it's really exciting. And the final point I'll come back to is this question of trust, because I do think that the trust in data is fundamental to everything that we're trying to do, and that's what we really need to push on. So Thank you all so much for joining us, and I will invite our next panel up to the stage.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all again for being here. I think we've, just in our first session there, teed up really nicely the next one we're about to start. I'm seeing some nodding, which is specifically going to be around generative AI and talent. So before we dive in, it's clear from the session, and I think from any news article anyone's been reading over the last year and a half, that Gen AI is top of mind. Most organizations are now trying to grapple with what does it look like to implement Gen AI at my organization? Does it matter at my organization? To what extent? And so those are the topics we're going to be aiming to dive into in this session, and the next one, which will be more audience-focused and an audience-centered debate. So you can look forward to that as well, also around Gen AI. But to kick off, again, thank you for the lovely tee-in from everyone from our last panel. I'd like to open up to our three panelists here, who I will briefly introduce. We have Patrick Chu, Head Enterprise Data Governance Office, Caterpillar. We have Donnie Patel, Chief of Digital Platforms Innovation at Baxter International Incorporated, and Rupal Dadu Patel, Director of Data Governance at the American Medical Association. So to drop right into it, Gen AI, overhyped, underhyped, or properly hyped? And then we'll take it from there.
I like properly hyped. I like that.
I think we all want to go there. I don't know if we're ready for it, depending on the organization that you belong to, right? There's a lot of data, and we need to understand that data very, very well in order for you to really take Gen AI to the next level from an organization standpoint. You guys heard me, right?
No, I think you
Thank
need to
you.
repeat that. I think you guys been in the industry long enough to know that we went from BI to big data to IoT to blockchain, AI. Of course, AI was there before, and now it's Gen AI. It's kind of like the same wine but different bottle. I don't think it's a hype, but I think Gen AI is going to be staying for sure, right? Because fundamentally, it deals with data. And I think data is the common denominator in anything you do, whether those things that I just named earlier, you have to feed good data into that to kind of get the insight. So yeah, some people may say it's a hype, but I think it's probably going to be a permanent hype, if I can use that word.
It's kind of like computers, right? To me, Gen AI, and all of that is a very advanced programming language, right? I don't know how many folks here programmed in C, but it's kind of, to me, it's C on steroids. You have a way of recognizing strings, you have a way of recognizing what the human is typing in, and someone throws out something in front of you. Sure, it's kind of like, to me, it's, again, I agree with my co-panelist here. It is sort of, there's a flavor of hype, a lot of flavor of hype. But I think it's behind that hype is anticipation of what people will do with it, right? It's the trust and maybe thinking that, okay, we're going to go beyond Google and Bing and all of these search engines, and we will have somebody else be our co-pilot, right? So it is the possibility that people are hyping. We'll see how it goes. But I agree with you. It's here to stay, just like computers are here to stay. 2008 is when I purchased my first iPhone 2. And since then, I don't know, I'm just sucked into this iPhone ecosystem. But back then, I remember there were competing products at that time. by Motorola and others. But even then, we felt like, oh my God, this is going to change the music industry. This is going to change everything. Where are we with iPhone? Like, I have forgotten what iPhone I have in my pocket because we have forgotten, because it become part of it. So I think it's going to become that way. It's going to become part of our lives.
Right, right. So to kind of give you guys excited, right? 59,733 new AI company just popped up in 2023. Out of that, 13,700 is from US. Is that a hype? You figure it out.
So I think turning from there then, I'd love to dive into specifics. Your organizations, how are you thinking about balancing, or organizations you work with, balancing using Gen AI with managing people? I mean, where is it actually useful? Where is it not? Where are you complementing people? Where maybe you're thinking about replacing people? How do you get buy-in for all these changes? And I'd love to start with you,
Yeah,
Vipul.
sure. For us, it's going to be mostly about process optimization, like really thinking about what our business units are doing from a core mission advocacy standpoint, and really revisiting that and seeing if we can bring in, not ChatGPT, but generative AI into that model. So really thinking about educating our workforce, and rethinking on how they're doing their jobs and optimizing their processes. So the people and process technology, people and process components that is going to be supported by our technology.
So, good question, but I have to put a disclaimer up front here. Whatever I'm speaking here is my own opinion.
Yeah, I think that's
Not necessarily of Caterpillar. So I've been in this industry long enough to build my own philosophy. So to answer your question, I think the way to address that is to really come back to 4 fundamentals. I call those KYs. Know your business. You gotta know your business, right? No matter what tool comes out on the horizon, if you don't know what your business is doing, voila, there's a problem there, fundamental problem, right? Know your process. Process support your business, because a process, you're able to solve problems, right? Not necessarily a solution looking for a problem. Usually that's the case we run into, but you're able to solve your problem because your process support your requirements, your business. Third thing is you really have to know your data, right? Process, data, business all come together. And the last point to Wade's question is, you really need to know your competency. That means your resources. Who are my so-called type A, personality for certain people who are skilled in? What are the areas that I need to beef up my skill? Competency is really the talent that you need to upgrade, constantly train them, cross-train them, exchange of resources within functional areas to beef them up. And the last one I just came out because Gen AI just came out. Know your PI. That means know your prompt, right? You guys know about prompt engineering. Generative AI is all about prompt engineering, as we share over lunch. So you got to somehow teach your people to say, we should throw good questions, not just, hey, give me the sales for quarter 4. Give me the sales for quarter 4 variance over the last 4 years and why, right? Those are the things that you need to kind of factor in. So those 5 KPs or KYs, you really need to kind of be prepared for that change on the horizon. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and with that, I'll give some examples with that. So Baxter makes some variety of products. We manufacture drugs, we manufacture solutions, we manufacture supplies for like surgery supplies, we manufacture beds, we manufacture devices. So you look at the healthcare horizon, if you want to outfit a room, you could pretty much outfit a room with 95% of our stuff. That rarely happens. Okay? So for us, it's about predictability. How our patients are using our devices, how our clinicians are using our devices, so that's the space we are looking at for where we have access to that data. Are we able to make those devices more efficient? Are we able to make our software more efficient? So that will help us. This is all machine logs, so cramming through the machine logs and being able to see efficiency around it. The amount of time a device is sent for service, so this automotive example, as you probably know this, is like how many times is the customer, in a hospital, sending the device back to service, and is it the same floor? Because oftentimes you find that certain floors are high utilizers on services. So you're looking at making a hospital more efficient. We'll look at drug manufacturing. How are they compounding drugs? How is a hospital compounding drugs? So we have these pharmacy systems, workflow systems. How are they compounding drugs? What drugs they're compounding more of? Can we predict on that based on their usage? So those are some of the areas in which we are looking at it. And then going back to what you were saying about hygiene, right? We have access to so much data, but our data strategy is all around, how our previous panelists were talking about. It's like the foundation. It's like, can we have clean data so we can make more prediction around it and not have biases? Because the bias would come from the clean data source. So we have clean data sources that certain areas are giving us cleaner data. We tend to go towards that only because that's where we get the best output.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, and back to Wade's question. As new attraction come on the horizon, the tendency is for organization, all the C-level people, not CIO, you're fine, to kind of chase after that, right? And part of the strategy is because there's new demand there, your current constrained resources, talents, and everything is going to be stretched. Because now it's like, okay, let's pivot. When you pivot, I always tell my team, right? If somebody asks you to do something, if I have 10 items on my plate, rule of thumb, the 11th item comes in, okay, which one should I take out? Because if you don't do that, you'll be constantly constrained and your resources will be stretched. And this is part of what I'm seeing, again, based on my experience, based on my failures. Every time I learn, I fall down, I get up again, right? I'm sure all of you do that too. I think that is the strategy we need to be very cognizant to say, okay, are we adding value? Are we adding, now sometimes you may not have value, but are we adding impact? Value and impact.
So I'd like to turn to data governance for a moment. Does Gen AI actually meaningfully change data governance strategies, or is it, do the same strategies that organizations are already thinking about, your organizations are already thinking about with regards to your AI tools and processes largely apply? Are there meaningful differences? If so, what are they?
Yeah, I think it does really impact data governance. One, you want to really have a solid foundation of desensitizing your data before you bring generative AI into the mix, right? So that's very important. And educating the users of the data across the organization. Everyone is a data citizen, right? And so everyone needs to be made aware of what they need to do to protect the institution's data, right? And putting those rules and regulations in place. In addition to that, leveraging designing our tools. I think the other panelists talked about that. Designing our tools so that we're taking that into consideration. Also, guidelines, simple guidelines on how you should use ChatGPT if you're going to use ChatGPT. Putting out some policies and procedures and continuously educating, your employees is very, very important. And I think that sits in the governance space.
And to ask actually one follow-up on that, do you think the same governance principles apply for the use of external or public tools and maybe internal-facing tools that have been developed using internal data, or are those going to be?
Yeah,
different?
I think even, someone else said this earlier, right?
Yeah.
If you have Salesforce, you have you're using that, right? And so you're also customizing it, for your use case, right? So you just want to make sure that your design principles are taking that into consideration. So it doesn't matter if it's a SaaS application or it's a custom grown application, that needs to be part of the design model. Agree.
Yeah, I agree with Rupal. If I have an option to change the word data governance, I would change it to data enablement. Because governance is so, I cringe every time I use that word. It's so negative in a sense, it sounds so policing, right? Enablement is more positive, and it's positive really from a encouraging perspective. How do I enable you, right? Data enablement. And I think part of that enablement not just comes from a data governance office or structure. I think data ownership has to go back to each employee, each staff, because the owners, ONUS, is really each one of us. Remember the good old days when we have to send Christmas gift and whatever wrapping to our kids or even to best friends? How many times you check the address to make sure it's correct? If we have that kind of intuition to influence every employee, before you create new data, edit, modify, delete, is that right? Is Patrick Chew spelled as C-H-E-W or C-H-E-U? Because you walk to Sears, you go to Kohl's, Patrick Chew, oh, C-H-E-O? Oh, no, that's Cho. One typo, one character, you send a downstream impact all the way to financial reporting, right? So if you can create that owners to each one person, that just treat it like you're mailing this Christmas present to your kids. How many times we double check that, right? And to answer your question about tools, I think we need to kind of be careful not to shut the door completely, for example, on ChatGPT. You're actually shutting down people's creativity, right? You got to have a balance and say, yep, you can use it, but in a confined environment. That's how we got to be, again, not policing, not governing, it's enabling people to realize that, hey, you own the data end of the day, not data governance office, not IT. So that is the innate sense of building the organization to really become data-driven. I like this title, data dividend. If you think about it, how do you get dividend? You have to invest on something before you get dividend, right?
Yeah.
You guys own stocks, right? You don't get dividend, you don't buy stocks. You need to invest in data. And part of that is investing into your people, your structure, your organization. And really, at the end of the day, is each one of us has accountability and responsibility for data.
On top of that, one of the other things I would say is that I don't know if you talked about culture, so
Yes. Good point.
culture is something is based in this area, in the topic at hand, is more around awareness. Your actions is going to yield into creating more bad data. Every organization, every company has bad data. It's not going away.
Yeah.
We can't say anymore that, well, we have a lot of bad data, that's why we can't predict supply chain. It's not going to work. We have to figure it out, right? So governance, yes, sure. I don't think there are any lawyers in the room, but if you look at governance and the way you thought about it, it's putting a structure. I think I'm thinking governance, when I think about it, I mildly disagree with you, but I think about governance as putting a structure in place. Putting some hygiene principles and things like those, rules of engagement, rules of data entry, rule of consumption in place, so we don't create more bad data, right? So that starts with awareness. So, specific example, I go to my team and I say, hey, how's this quarter looking? And they're like, well, this is what's happening, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, okay, where did you get that information from? These 5 data sources. I'm like, how much do you trust these 5 data sources? And then they go in again. So when we look at AI and applications of such, I'm going to the team. I was like, well, why don't we look at that and see if there's aspects of this that we can automate, but then also look at all the places that we did. We did a 6 Sigma exercise. We took a sticky, went around. how many places we have that people are putting their hands on a keyboard and entering something. There were, in one process we had about 120 breakage points. When I call it breaking points, is because that's where human entered something. So you look at governance, data governance is about, okay, you're not getting rid of that. It is going to be, it's a sad reality or the reality, however you want to look at it. Now, how you build your structure around it.
Or you can spin it to say, from a data governance standpoint, let's create that data interoperability so you can reduce the risk of causing human entered errors, right? You know, so there's the other way of looking at it. And I love the fact that you made that comment around data governance isn't about policing, right? It isn't really about that. It's about bringing everyone's awareness around the data and how they can improve it. I was at a conference the other day, and they were talking about data governance is the tool that makes the engine go faster.
Yes.
Right? And that's really what it is. And we need to change that script a little bit because I don't like the policing word. I just don't like it.
Let's create a movement in the industry.
So I guess I'm curious, what does that look like in practice then? I mean, each of you have touched on this piece of data literacy, core competencies of team members. I mean, how do you actually engender that? You know, I think it's easy to say, like, we need this thing, but what is it? How do you build that? And then what other types of competencies are needed to successfully roll out Gen AI in the organization beyond maybe that basic data literacy?
So I can take that.
Yeah, please.
So it went to my programming team or the developing team or developers, and then I was like, okay, how are you hiring employees? How are you bringing in people? Well, we look at these sources, we get these resumes, and then after that, we do go through these 7 interviews, and okay, and then that's your decision point. So it's like this. It's like, no, we do 9 rounds of interviews. I'm like, that's a lot. But okay, we do 9 rounds of interviews. I was like, who interviews a person? It's got this, and this. All right, okay, and then what are you gonna do after that? We on board, they start working, and they have some trainings. I'm like, okay, but there's not continuous education around something. Like, so, no, we have this whole training platform. So we went through our training platform. There's like tons of training on cash flow and, you know, cybersecurity and all these other various topics. I was like, okay, are you gradually taking that person and educating them to the next level and the next level, the next level? No, they leave. I'm like, you know why?
Yeah.
It's because we don't have those training programs in place. So how we are tackling that is we are launching some training programs that will allow a person to qualify from, you know, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then each program is a mix of some training modules that we are creating using a third party or internal, or maybe it's knowledge sharing. And then through that stage gate, we kind of excite people to work in our company, but at the same time, we are constantly injecting the culture we want the employee to follow, constantly putting that in place. Because if you tell anyone, an employee, and say, hey, I want you to go on this training portal and do a training on culture, I'll do it. Never happens. It's mandatory. Okay, I'll do it. Right? We don't want that to happen. So if you embed into part of it, then it could be the data governance culture or the culture around data hygiene. So that's what we are doing.
I don't know if I can say it in the context of Gen AI, but I think it's important for us to know our audience, right? Like who's our audience? And if, you know, again, this is my philosophy. It's not about the AMA. It's you know, we have lots of departments within the organization, and they all touch data, right? And to be able to understand the context in which they're using the data and connect those individuals to ideate on that concept, right? And to expand on it. It's not related to Gen AI, but it's really about the customer and knowing that customer and potentially even linking it to the customer experience, right? To see how we can improve our data organization by really getting in and diving deep into who and what that data is supposed to serve.
totally agree. You just got me excited to give you guys an example. I'm going to bring you guys a couple of years back, maybe 5 years. This is when blockchain just started, and everybody was all excited about blockchain. And this is going to go undeclared as to who it is. This SVP came to me like, Patrick, we need to get to blockchain immediately. I was like, why? Oh, it's the hottest thing in the market right now. We'll be leading, we'll be ahead. I say, okay. I said, give me 2 weeks to do assessment for you. And he goes, why do you need the assessment? Well, I need to know your current state before, to check whether, you have the capacity and so forth. So I visited the plant, right? This plant was really interesting. They have all the flowers that comes in, and then they make a certain product. But instead of in big SAP tool, right? Putting one item at a time for each flower supplier, and they're trying to do product traceability. They mix all 20 suppliers into the bin and mix it up and produce. Great, right? Efficiency. So in SAP, they only enter one item. 20 suppliers of flowers, one item. Sure enough, product recall. Which supplier provided you that flower? Okay, so you can't trace it now anymore. You need to do retooling, retraining of 250 plans for all the plant people, because you cannot enter all 20 suppliers in one single item, right? You need to break it down. Because if you have to trace this supplier gave you the wrong bad flour with bacteria, I could trace it. Went back to him, I say, you could do blockchain. 22.5 million, I calculated for you across North America and South America. Why do I need so much? It's not buying the software. It's retooling, re-engineering, reprocess, re-engineering, really. Because your people has been so lack of training or trying to do shortcuts, right? Gen AI is going to be the same way, right? If you don't take inventory of what your current process, data, resources, those things that I talk about, right? Prompt input, prompt engineering, it's going to be a resource that you need to bring it up. If you don't have that training, start now.
Is it a real job now, prompt engineer? I did not look at it.
it is.
Yeah?
As far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I share with you guys over lunch, right? It's like a over-glorified BA. Think about it. It's really
It is true.
asking the right question, right, to get the right requirements and then document it, because that's going to be translated into how your Gen AI is going to feed back to you.
I actually had a friend of mine and I were just on ChatGPT the other day, and we were geeking out. I was like, okay, let's ask that person, the program, to make an itinerary for us.
Oh, yeah.
He was getting better itineraries than me. Okay, he's like, because you didn't train your one. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, because you didn't train yours. And then I was like, okay, ask the question that I normally ask, and his threw off, and his was not giving the right responses. Hallucination. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually heard that one of my friends actually builds their vacation plans using ChatGPT. Where should I go?
Well, so we have some vacation advice, thank you. I've used it
ChatGPT.
myself. But actually, before we wrap up, I think we have time for probably one question from the audience. Unfortunately, probably only one, but don't be shy. We'll also, the next session, we'll have some opportunity to jump in as well. So anyone have a question for the panelists before we wrap up? Thank you. Yeah, please.
You were discussing interviewing. Oh, thank you. You were discussing interviewing, and it seems like such an antiquated process and so much risk on both sides of the table for the employer and employee. Is there a better method to do it? Is Gen AI helping in any way?
Maybe. I've been to one interview once, and I got rejected, and I'll tell you why. It was one question with 95 options. That's it. That's your interview. And then after that, you get another one. But I don't know. I mean, I think the better option could be that you could possibly have a bot that you speak with, and then you potentially pass an exam maybe, and then after that, you end up in a certain place. Because the interview process that I have, and I know people hate it, is I'll throw a problem at that person and ask that person to whiteboard. And it's like, is this even an interview? I'm like, no, this is a real example. Work through it.
So I'm going to piggyback on that question interview, right? I was sharing with Scott. I was in Japan, in Tokyo, in May. I got to the hotel really late, like 12:30 in the morning. I was like, crap, I'm going to check in. And I can show you the facts. I walked to the counter. This chat robot, literally, she looks almost like human. She checked me in. Now, that question prompt, it's got to be so, okay, either I need your passport because I'm international, right? And all this. It's amazing, right? Yeah. So that use case got to be so extensive, right, in an interview. And that is because it's a solid prompt engineering that created that. And when I got time after this, I'll show you that. And Scott couldn't believe that. That looks like a human being.
Well, with that, I think we'll wrap up this session. Thank you again all so much. I mean, what I'm hearing is that it sounds like, if not overhyped, right? Maybe properly hyped.
It's here to stay.
Here to stay.
It's like smartphone.
Yeah.
It's here to stay.
Here to stay, but will be improved upon. Yeah. We're at the iPhone 1 or 2 now, maybe, and
just pay for airtime.
Sure.
We keep giving phones free.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So I'm now going to turn to all of you. We're going to start with a quick straw poll of the room at the beginning of this session. At the end, we'll revisit the same straw poll, and it's going to be an audience, so all of you, centered debate. So the prompt is, this house believes the risks of generative AI content and its disinformation far outweigh the benefits. So again, if you believe that the risks of generative AI content outweigh the benefits, so riskier, risks outweigh the benefits, please raise your hand now. Well, I see one hand. This is, okay, thank you for being bold. 2 hands. And then everyone else thinks the benefits outweigh the risks. Are either of you okay being put on the spot? Okay, I'd love to start over here then with your perspective on why you think that's the case. And I'm happy to also to maybe provide some thoughts myself, but please.
I may have got the question a little bit reverse. I actually think it is risky. Risk, that's the question that
Yeah. Do you believe the risks outweigh the benefits? Risks of,
I do believe the
content.
risk, because the risk, you cannot take it, from the way I look at it,
Sure.
you cannot calculate the risk of what's today. You have to take a look at risk, what's going to happen 15, 20 years down the line. Down the line, we may be totally dependent on these kind of tools where people have forgotten how to use their, human intellect, and that could be an issue, So you have CEOs and CIOs trying to hire the best people, but I don't think they will find anybody like that. So, because unless they have a tool like that, they're not going to be able to work. This is only at the work, but things like that. They're similar, and we do not have enough intelligence to know whether these tools are answering it correctly or not. So.
Okay, sure. Can we hear from our one other? Yeah.
You know how they say that, imagine a fly in your soup, right? A fly in your dish. A fly or a little spoonful of dirt could spoil the entire dish or the entire box of honey. So a little bit of misinformation, a little bit of fake news could create a black swan event. And it could create something unpredictable, or it could add polarization and fighting. And it's very hard to control fake news. If you hear what's happening at X, Twitter, the bad news just proliferates and there is no control over it. So I think GenAI could do a lot of good, but a little bit of evil, unfortunately, could ruin it all.
So I guess I'm going to share quickly. There's two things that scare me. I'm going to just put myself, I think I probably stand with the room ultimately, but if I have to play devil's advocate, there's two things that scare me that I think want to raise that I haven't heard yet. One is sort of locking in of our existing cultural ecosystem, if you will. That's sort of an odd way to put it, but that as we become increasingly reliant on Gen AI, we're becoming increasingly reliant on content that has been developed on the basis of pre-existing content. And if there isn't enough new content being generated by people, we risk, what I've seen thrown around is degenerative AI. There's other terms, call it what you will, but there is a risk, I think, that's real, that the returns on generative AI will decrease, the marginal returns, if you will, and that there'll be increasing risk of using generative AI systems as the output quality decreases. That would be maybe more true of public systems rather than something trained on your organization's internal data, but it seems like a real risk to be considering nonetheless. So I think that there's a very real risk there, and tied into that, certain cultural risks around the biases that are pulled into those systems. If we're locking our ideas in certain ways into place based on the content that already exists in the world, the books that have already been produced, the films that have already been produced, the videos, the audio. This is sort of an odd example maybe, but something I was thinking about is, so the image of Viking horns on helmets is apocryphal. Vikings, their helmets didn't have horns. And if you go to a generative AI, if you go to DALL-E or whatever you may be using, and you ask for, give me an image of a Viking, it's going to have horns. And it's sort of maybe a slightly dumb example, but like that example is true writ large, right? So all of the, that's sort of an example of a bias, but all of the cultural biases, the misinformations that are already popularized, those things are reified. They become built into these systems, baked into them, and I think that there's an enormous amount of risk associated with that will need to be overcome in order for the long-term value to be realized. Again, I'm mostly just, I think I do probably agree with the room. I'm throwing out some thoughts just to play devil's advocate, but I'm curious if anyone wants to respond to either of those. How do we overcome those issues? Am I overstating those issues? Anyone who really wants to be an evangelist for Gen AI here?
I think it's a good point, but except that, is that really a problem of generative AI? Or it's a problem of the data, or the sources itself, right? So because for you to think of generative AI, it's just computer taking all those information out there and made a decision for you. Versus before, you don't have it, then human, you go out and you find the information and you make the decision. And as a human, when I get out, I could get biased. I could get unconsciously get biased information or consciously. And also my own source of information is much, much limited actually in this sense, because generative AI computer has more computing power, they have more access of the data. So in my opinion, yes, I'm concerned there's a risk, but it's more of, again, get back to our topic, it's the quality of the data that's feeding the generative AI.
So then how do we, I'm curious, from your perspective or anyone else in the room, how do we then improve data quality or ensure that data quality remains high? And this may be something that you can be thinking about with regards to your organization. I'm sort of posing it as a societal question, I recognize, but I think the two are ultimately related in certain ways.
Right, and I think, talk about it again, it's a culture, and also you have to create rules and create governance. I like your opinion of the data governance, so that people know how to properly maintain the quality of the data, how to build the right process, and then and if someone build it, other people can replicate the same process.
Please.
So I would like to address the 2 points addressed by the gentleman and the lady. So the first point was about the risks of losing the skill set and then the AI going out of control. Risk of losing the skills is that we are always in a transition phase of replacing the skills. Those who are old enough, they know that they did programming in assembly language. I myself started programming in 8085 basically. That was in school. At the work, I never did it. And after that, these higher level languages replaced all the assembly language programming. Then even that procedural languages got replaced by the object oriented. Now use libraries, and now you use bigger and bigger building blocks. Now it's more like drag and drop kind of a code. So those higher level skills, they always keep on replacing because they add more economic value. Gen AI is expected to add $7 trillion to world economy every year. So it's a huge amount of surplus it is going to create. Some skills, some jobs will be replaced, but that's the economic nature of the things. And the second point was about the malinformation or the fake news it could create, basically. So definitely that's a risk there. But then how do you fight? Probably like use sometime more intelligent system than humans, basically, which can quickly detect that this video was edited, this news. It could cross-check from multiple sources in near real time, and then it could immediately repudiate. So that's the way you basically do this. There are some experts, and they say like there is roughly 10% chance that AI could go out of control, and then it could become our overlord. That's a true risk. And nobody has answer to that.
Because I think what's going to happen with AI is that similar to YouTube and other search engines that exist right now, there are organizations that govern the content that goes into those search engines. There are things that are turned off, so it cannot be publicly available, right? That's the next evolution, in my opinion, that's going to happen. There's going to have to be some sort of control of what goes into feeding these models, because if there isn't control, it can get out of hand. And again, we're moving the engine.
So actually, really quickly, before you jump in, I don't propose to have the answer, but I think both of those points, for me, again, speak to another risk that I don't feel like I've yet heard well addressed. I'll say that. Again, I'm just sort of trying to push back on the room a little, which is, even if there are quality controls, I think it's already plausible, and within a certain year certainly would be, that someone could take this video feed of this session and generate an artificial video using my likeness, doing something else, saying something else. You were raising, obviously, the risk of misinformation, which is only going to get more sophisticated and more difficult to deal with, to track down, to identify. So again, that risk feels extremely real and pertinent to me. And I'm curious if anyone here is thinking about how we effectively mitigate that risk. I don't, again, propose that we can stop the progress of technology necessarily.
So Wade, I think I had the same concern on generative AI a while back.
Sure.
And that's the reason why WatsonAI.governance is supposed to do. And it will address that. Part of that is, it's no different than the risk we take today in any business or even in our personal life, right? It's all about validation. I mean, to Rupal's point, it's all about verification, validation. Now, if we are smart enough to have Gen AI to create new stuff, we should be smart enough to have Gen AI control what goes in and what should come out, right? That's part of that. And the other part too is really about education and change management, because those two are synonymous in some way, parallel, because if you really don't understand, your fear goes higher. But if we educate you, we do a change management, kind of really walk through and tell you what are the benefits out of it, you will see that in any business context, usually you go after the benefits, and then all the benefits is going to wash down all the risks. In terms of risk, really, you just need to kind of make sure it's calculated risk. That's the assurance I can give it to you.
And then also, if we could give a mic, over for after, but let's
if
start.
I may speak.
Yeah, please. Sorry, jump in, and then we'll go, I think, 1, 2, 3, if we can. Yeah, and then afterwards.
So the fundamental statement I will start questioning it is, what is risk, and how do you define a risk, and is there a risk too? And then generative AI, again, we're generalizing it, assuming that the generative AI which we'll be using is the broader sense, large language models build and how you're building the model. But the risk is defined based on the model you're using it, right? If you have a controlled model, your risks are lower. Going back to your example, if you don't own a stock, you will not get dividend. And what is the risk you're going to take to get a better outcome? And how do you control the risk based on the models you're using? What if your models were trained to your scope, which you are using to take care of the risk, which may be lower risk because you are using a model which is catered for your use and not a broader language model, which is trained for whatever data you're trying to access, but not controlled. So it's mostly how you control the model which you're using, and is it relevant to you? If it's not relevant to you, then there is a lot of risk. But it is controlled, then maybe the risk is lower, and that is benefit to you.
Hi there, and I was just actually wondering, what about if we change the phrasing of the question? So what about if the question is, we believe the benefits of human decision-making far outweigh the risks? Who would put their hands up? Now, I think to point out, I think it was in the 1970s that Kahneman and Tversky wrote this seminal paper about data-driven decision-making, how humans make decisions and such, which actually point out there's tons of biases and there's tons of risk aversion. There's also the way humans make decisions isn't very rational. Now, I won't ask you to put up your hands, but who believes in your own organization all decision-making is sufficiently rational and sufficiently fact-based? I think we all know the point there as well. I mean. So it looks at how do we counterbalance? What's the alternative to this? And of course, you know where I'm going is I believe that a lot more fact-based, data-driven decision-making, probably AI-based, is important. And I agree with your point as well that we can have the systems counterbalances it well. It's almost like having ChatGPT talk to ChatGPT to make sure they're telling the truth and such. So let's just think about the alternatives here.
Can we, actually, sorry, can we, before you jump in, can we turn over here? I want to make sure that he's able to, and then maybe after. Apologies for cutting off. Yeah.
So one of the places where I think the conversation about disinformation is interesting is the impact of generative AI on democracy. So a few of us are giving a talk next month with the League of Women Voters in Chicago and talking about AI and the potential impact on democracy. And this is a place where, if you think about it, you have political candidates and politicians who have a wide range of content of them speaking, videos of them that are going to be available publicly, and the potential in the future for AI engines to take that content and then generate new content of them potentially saying other things. And I think that's where those of us in the IT field, at some point, we're going to have to come up with something that creates an authoritative source so that when that video gets put out, does that link back to a server that says this is a legitimate source where I, as a political candidate, actually was speaking and said that versus this is something that was created by generative AI. Because I think potentially the impact on our democracy, if whatever you see online, you can't trust whether that's something that someone actually said, is that something they said 10 years ago, or something that they didn't say, the ramifications are significant on democracy.
So I recognize I've driven the conversation towards sort of the big societal questions a little bit, but I'm curious if anyone has, whether you agree with the prompt or not, if anyone here has been thinking about managing the risks we've been discussing within your organization and what that looks like and has anything to add, sort of grounding it back to earth a little bit in terms of the day-to-day work anyone here is engaged with and finding that the risks within your individual organization are maybe giving you some pause about implementing Gen AI now or over the next year or two, or you're sort of full steam ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, being in the insurance industry, although we've already explored it beyond, to a certain extent, kind of to provide some type of responses that are non-licensed, non-contractual, The early indication that, or kind of the inertia that's picking up is that any service like this would likely need to be certified, licensed by each state regulator. You know, essentially pass all the exams that a typical person that wants to become an agent passes. Because what we've run into is, and this is anecdotal in our testing, is that the advice that is provided, the output from these prompts is not inaccurate, but is not appropriate for the question. So for example, you know, a question about a condo, needing a condo insurance in Chicago here, the response, it didn't understand that a condo is above kind of several floors, and the first suggestion was you need flood insurance. And so that's not incorrect. For the business, the actual landlord owner needs flood insurance, but it couldn't delineate, you know, certain nuances of what you really need that a person right away would be like, you know, you don't need that, you don't need earthquake, you know, all that stuff. So what I'm getting at ultimately is I think there will be a day where there are certain modules or lanes of AI that are very specific and they pass all the exams that people do and therefore can respond more appropriately like a person would.
Maybe just to add to this, I went back to the 1970s, so let me go back a bit further. Actually, just wrote a paper, it was a couple of weeks ago, it was about modern data governance and how do you ensure this. And I actually went back to Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton. And it's all about imposing that system of checks and balances, both in terms of the data, the source data that you use, as well as the models that you use in terms of from an AI perspective. And it's having, I think Montesquieu called it the trias politica. Well, here you have the trias of data governance and analytics and such. And that can be different entities, different roles, and different responsibilities in the system. So it's part of the process side, the people side, as well as the technology side. It's not difficult, but it's about the discipline of implementing it and following it. And again, one of the things as well, do not allow room for discretion for people in that process. Because discretion is the fertile soil for bias. And I think that's one of the most dangerous things that we run into. So stick to that process. As the Germans say, gründlich, a bit thorough approach, and follow the way that you're doing it with those checks and balances.
Sure, I mean, I know there's at least one large LLM vendor who purports to design their systems on the basis of constitutional AI. So there's, I think, some, you know, you're not the only one who's arriving at the question in those terms, but I think it's an interesting point.
And sorry, I would share this because I'll share this over lunch. Just take a perspective. All models are wrong, but some are useful. Then you'll be safe.
So before we wrap the discussion up, I'm curious if there's anyone here who's willing to be an evangelist, anyone here who you feel like in your organization, full steam ahead, all systems go, like yes on Gen AI. We've heard some people have more reservations. And if not, actually, I think that's interesting in its own right, but sure.
We've started to go down that path. And one of the things we've done, we heard on a couple of the panels earlier, is centralized some of the concepts here. We've created a smallish business unit to put the right guardrails on a department by department, business function by business function level. What are the right ways to use, what are the approved ways to use tools like ChatGPT or other Gen AI and things like that. We're centralizing some of that governance as well. And I think that's something we're moving forward with using it, but we've recognized that this could go off the rails if it isn't governed. And so that's kind of one of the first steps we've done here is, you know, we went through the standard cycle that came up, I think Patrick brought it up, you know, C-level executives coming in with, we have to do this, we have to stay cutting edge, and recognize that this needs a process behind it. So we're jumping in, but in a measured way in that regard.
So I think I'm looking at the time here. Anyone who has any final burning thoughts you want to get out before we wrap up this discussion? Great. In that case, oh, no, please. We have enough time for I think, you to jump in.
Going back to the first person who talked about the risk of Gen AI, right? I'm thinking a little bit about the 0 to 1 book from Peter Thiel. He always say, like, a person with a computer is more riskful than a person without a computer, right? And definitely, we add more value to society having computers, right? When calculators were created, a lot of people say people will forget how to add numbers, they won't be creative, and then here we are, right? Many years after. So I think this is kind of those things, and just looking at everybody's already thinking, how do I apply this in the right way? I think I'm positive on this. I think it's gonna be more productive for humans, right? I hear an episode in a podcast called Data Skeptics. Maybe some people can check it out. Is this teacher, don't remember the school though, she say, okay, everybody's saying ChatGPT is the worst for teachers. Everybody is gonna use it for doing the homework. She say, I'm gonna use it for helping my students, right? So she start like, okay, what is the thing that I spend more time with the students that is not a good use of my time, right? And then students don't have much access to me on that. Maybe iterating over ideas of an essay. How do I start an essay, right? So she teaches the students how do you use ChatGPT to iterate over ideas of what you want to write on your essay, right? Then she puts some rules like, we are gonna write this in class, not out of the classroom, so they cannot use it, right? So if you think about it, even a teacher in a school could think about the technology, say how I apply it, how I add value, and which policies I have to put in place in order to help my students and not harm. I am confident humans are going to find a way. That's one of the things I think.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to pose the prompt one more time. We'll vote again, see if anyone has changed their minds on the basis of the very persuasive three of us who are, I guess, arguing for the one side a little bit.
I just want to clarify one thing. I want to break the ice so that there is some discussion.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. So again,
I'm in the process of selling an AI.
Yeah.
In other words, he changed his mind.
Exactly, yeah.
Talk to us and we'll talk about AI.
So,
I just wanted to address your statement about humans making decisions. Of course, humans are very imperfect and often irrational. The problem with using AI in some areas, such as social media, for example, is that it plays on human weaknesses and it increases irrationality. It heightens passions, and that's where I see the most danger of misinformation. That it makes humans even less rational than they already are. It heightens passions.
So the question is, has anyone been convinced? So the prompt.
Don't listen to the politicians.
So the prompt again is, this house believes the risks of generative AI content and its disinformation far outweigh the benefits. So if you're raising your hand, you believe the risks outweigh the benefits. Where do we stand? I'm curious. Wow, okay. So our hands went down and we have one or two semi-hands up, but roughly we seem an optimistic group towards Gen AI, which is maybe not surprising, but interesting to see nonetheless. And with that, we've promised you a break, and I think now it's time for that. So we'll have 15 minutes until the next session begins. Feel free to mill about and chat and get some water, use the restroom, whatever you'd like. And 15 minutes from now, we'll reconvene and get started with the last few sessions before we wrap up. And thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to be here.
That was a pretty impressive.
Yeah, go for it. I'm just trying to figure out if I need to make an announcement or. Yeah, a little dong. One moment. Will you announce or should I? Should I announce or will you? Okay. Welcome everyone back. If you could move towards taking a seat, we're going to get started with the next session. Thank you, Harold. Oh, we're going to begin the next session, so yeah.
Okay, good. I'll get.
You got it? Great. Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
please take your seats. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you all got some good chatting in, some snacks, restroom break. So we're going to kick off this session. I'll first introduce our guests and then dive into the topic. So we have Kevin Boyd, the Chief Information Officer at the University of Chicago. We have Rahul Trivedi, Vice President, Intelligent Automation at TransUnion. We have Jennifer Van Camp, Vice President, R&D Data Analytics at AbbVie. Have I pronounced that incorrectly?
AbbVie.
Thank you, AbbVie.
That's okay.
Yeah. And this session will be focusing on ethical and responsible AI in particular. So we've obviously touched on this in some of the previous sessions, but we'll be deep diving on those topics. And just to kick right off, because I want to dive back in, for our panelists here, so how can organizations establish trust at each stage of the AI lifecycle? And how do you think about this issue within your organization? And anyone can feel free to jump in.
Okay, I guess I can
Yeah.
start. So I think one thing that's really important when it comes to building trust and the way that we've tackled it within our industry is to ensure that you're always bringing stakeholders with you. It certainly is not, AI is not something where somebody's going to sit in their office and think deep thoughts and then say, voila, here's your solution. So I think it starts with the use case, right? Sitting alongside the stakeholders, ensuring you have that value statement, ensuring that you're addressing the right problem. That's really, that's a group effort. Not only then when you define the use case, but then what data do you use, right? Again, it's not a single person. This is sitting with the stakeholders. What is the right data set? What is the gold standard? How do I have to normalize it? What do I need to do to that data in order to make it answer the question that you need? When you decide to then build the models, right? Making sure that those data engineers don't have any bias, making sure that the data that's used doesn't have any bias, ensuring that you are collectively thinking about how you're going to train the model, what model you're even going to use. I think when you start to deploy, you're working with your security officers, you're ensuring you're using the proper ML apps. And then, of course, the last but not least, and maybe oftentimes overlooked, is how is your stakeholder helping you to reinforce the learning, right? Are there checks and balances? I think it was brought up earlier and in our US Constitution, right? Are there the right checks and balances? How are we working with our stakeholders to ensure that that model still works? Has data changed? Has a different question evolved? So are you working together? And I think making sure you're bringing your stakeholders with you is just absolutely foundational in terms of trust.
Absolutely agree. So I would like to add further on this. Whether you are using artificial intelligence or human intelligence, if you are using some data for decision making and you are creating that data to come up with an AI model, or you are coming up with a table on a piece of paper, you are back to fundamentals. How truthful, how authentic, how correct your data is. And then how you are controlling the processes along the way to keep the sanctity of the data. So that is how you will establish trust in an AI model.
So I think how we think about establishing trust may also be different whether we're talking about discriminative AI or generative AI. I think that with discriminative AI, I completely agree with everything that was just said. I think with generative AI, sometimes the framework is also a little bit different. So it's similar in that understanding the corpus is really important, and understanding what it is that we're trying to achieve is very important. But one of the things that we're finding is it's also really important to establish a mental model for the people who are using it. Because I think that something we see is that it's very easy for people to think of generative AI as the expert. Artificial intelligence, just the way that we think about it, creates this mental model for people as the expert. And then they're very surprised when sometimes the answers that they receive are, they may be 80% great and then 20% really not great. And it's creating a mental model that is more generative AI as assistant, who you need to be looking over the shoulder that you might if it was a more junior team member, is also something that we see helps with building trust. It's that basic mental model of what is this tool, that this is the assistant. And I think we're seeing that with many of the vendors, calling these tools co-pilots and things like that. But still, I think for us as leaders, reinforcing that model is important.
And probably also to the point about the models is, I think people trust what they understand. It was brought up earlier, right? People trust what they understand. So I think having internal expertise that can help the organization understand what is this model, what can it do, what is it capable of, and what is it not capable of, and what should it be used for and what shouldn't it be used for. And I think a lot of times when a vendor does come in and it sounds like magic, right? So we a lot of times have to sit down and really understand, how do we explain this to our stakeholders? How do we ensure our organization really understands the limitations, the pros, the cons?
Yeah. I want to expand a little bit further on what Kevin said earlier. So our traditional AI models, they did not have this problem of predicting false data or extrapolating beyond what they have been trained. But this problem has been seen in generative AI models, and that's called hallucination. There are multiple solutions already now available to solve that problem. One of them is through prompt engineering, that in your prompt itself you have a corrective prompt or the checking prompt at the end of your prompts. So that is one way. Another way is now the large language models are being developed specifically to prevent hallucination. So if the model does not have enough information to answer you, it will say that I can't predict, I don't have enough information. So that way. But then the other way is that you train your model on the specific data. If you are doing underwriting for insurance industry, you train with the enough underwriting data, so then it is able to do a right kind of a prediction based on the available data.
Yep.
So I think I'm curious about the explanatory piece that was raised. I guess, in your opinion, within your organizations, what level of explanation is enough, right? No, I mean, actually.
No, that is a fair question because.
And for what types of models?
Right. So I guess what I don't go into meetings with my stakeholders go talk about deep neural nets and how the mathematical operations occur. I think it would be not even of interest. But where you can get explainability is, for example, if I have a large language model that I'm going to zero shot with some other article, and I say, summarize this article for me, right? What I can provide in the output is at least some indication of where where did this come from, right? So it doesn't feel like it's this mystical machine. It actually says, well, I summarized this from this paragraph, and now you can see it, and I highlight it. So the user can kind of have a human intuition, a human in the loop, if you will, to say, yeah, that makes sense. I like that. Or no, I don't, and I'm going to go back and prompt engineer that out.
We've been doing sessions internally at the university with many of our administrative departments, and we are taking time to actually explain to people how they work, and we're trying to tailor that to the audience as much as possible. We're not necessarily getting into neural networks, but we are explaining a little bit that when it comes to generative AI, there's an aspect of it that is generating, and then there's a discriminative that is saying, well, how probable is that? So, like, we've had some success explaining to people that as it's generating, it's looking at, okay, what's the likelihood of these words being close together? Like the example that seems to be easy for people to understand is good morning or good night are two words that in the English language are often together. Good tree, that's not a common combination. That's a mental model that people are able to grasp. And then we talk about some of the contextual things that can be either good or problematic. How does bias get introduced into a model? And what do we know about the corpus, the content in some of these models? And how can the prompt that you use generate either good results or bad results? And having those conversations up front with our Office of Legal Counsel, with our librarians, with our groups throughout the university, we're finding is resulting in much better conversations, and people, I think, using the tools and understanding more of what they're good for and what the risks are.
So explainability is a tough subject. There are certain situations where you can backtrack and show where the decision came from. For example, say if you are summarizing an article. But then there are certain situations where it is very, very difficult to get to the source of that decision-making process in this. And part of the reason is, like Kevin mentioned, that there are certain weights created as part of this model, and it's very hard to get to like how these weights were calculated and why these weights were calculated and how those probabilistically those were determined. It all depends on what data was fed in order to create that model. Nevertheless, for many industries, especially the regulated ones, explainability is a very important factor, because regulatory bodies don't want them to be making willy-nilly decisions. Like they don't want humans to be abruptly favoring some group or people. They don't want the AI models to do either. And that's why a lot of regulation is being introduced towards that objective.
So actually, I think that's a great segue into the regulation question, which is how are you, within the context of your organization, thinking about the challenges and or opportunities from the regulatory landscape?
So short answer is very carefully.
Okay.
Wherever the regulators are involved, any lawyers in the room? Unfortunately, lawyers get involved. And when lawyers get involved, things, they, instead of walking and running, they start crawling and standing. But they have to do their job. We have to do a thorough analysis of every single thing which could go wrong and which could create a liability for the organization. So essentially, we got to analyze every single aspect of your program, every single aspect of the tools you are using, and what could be the potential impacts, and then take a mitigative action on that.
I guess I can go. I guess
sure. Go for it.
So I work in the pharmaceutical space, and so probably one of the biggest regulators that we work with is the FDA. What's very nice is that recently the FDA has really come to embrace the future of artificial intelligence in the pharmaceutical industry, and So we've been working collaboratively with them. Back to my initial point with building trust, right? We can't really do anything without them. So what's nice is they're really coming alongside us, not just us, but the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, to say, okay, where can we have better processes? Where can we eliminate work that might not be value add? Where can we get to decisions faster, make decisions better, get medications out to patients that are safer and in a more efficient manner? So I think at least in our space, a lot of the regulatory agencies are seeing what's possible, and they're working with us in that manner. So it's slow going, right? It isn't like, hey, let's just make this happen tomorrow. There's a lot of checks and balances. There's a lot that goes into that. But it's nice that we're able to work on that together. So.
I would say so far there haven't been that many regulations that have directly targeted higher education. We're starting to see some in the research space. So National Institutes of Health have put out a regulation about the use of AI in evaluating grants and not having unpublished grants being evaluated in some of the public AI engines. And I think we'll see more of that type of thing. And certainly, so we also have a large academic medical center, and obviously all of the healthcare regulations impact us there. But I think that the more general privacy and security regulation that is likely to come will certainly affect us.
So actually, I'd like to turn to a slightly different topic. We're talking about the model side, and I guess in certain ways, when we were saying explainability, we're also talking about the digital literacy side in a sense, right? So sort of two forms of explainability, if you will. But I'm curious about, from your perspectives or within your organizations, what needs to be done with regards to the data piece itself. So data foundations, what does the data need to look like? What types of preparations, data governance structures, again, to touch on that, need to be in place for all of the rest of that to happen in terms of having responsible and ethical use of AI systems?
Can go. So I work for TransUnion, and TransUnion, being a credit bureau, is essentially a data analytic company. Data is our bread and butter, and so is true for other credit bureaus too. So essentially, we have very good data platforms. We could use our existing data sources to use in generative AI models when we choose to do that. Right now, we are still in the process of evaluating the risks and evaluating the potential business cases and how they will comply with the existing regulations.
I think for us, we have a lot of work to do to make our data cleaner and more consistent. There are opportunities for us with AI in many areas of what we do, but I think that one of the challenges with our data is that what we do today with analytics, bad data has often been explained away. So when we encounter anomalies in the data, it's easy enough to have someone look at it and say, oh, that was just a particular year, that was a particular time, someone entered the data wrong, and we basically push things to the side. And that becomes, I think, far more problematic with some of the discriminative AI, where we actually need the AI to be working based on patterns. And if the data isn't clean, the patterns that it's going to see may not be real patterns. And so that's where we need to get much better with the data that we have. I'll give you an example. So in the alumni development space, we have 200,000 plus alums and a relatively small alumni development staff who are working to cultivate relationships with those alumni, with the hopes that some of them will choose to then give back to the university. Using predictive analytics and using predictive AI, what you would want to do is look for patterns in the data and see who should those alumni development officers be spending their time with. Well, that's only going to work if the data is good. And we have quite a bit of opportunities, I would say, to make the data better.
Actually, I'm going to ask one follow-up question on that, and then I'd love to hear from you as well. But what does that look like in practice, making the data clear and more consistent? I think it's, I assume most of the guests here would also want to make their data cleaner and more consistent. So how does one go about that?
So that's a great question. Unfortunately for us, I think a lot of it is, it starts out with really understanding what is the data that we need. So it's prioritizing the data. So it's analyzing the data, prioritizing the data, then assessing what's the state of the data, what sort of cleanup is needed, and then really understanding what cleanup can be done with some level of automation and what cleanup actually needs to be done with humans. And that's really what we're doing in different parts of the organization right now.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, data platforms, it's like my favorite topic. It is. So at AbbVie, 3 years ago, we started one of the largest data platform projects in the biopharmaceutical industry. And what we did was basically take our operational data stores, which are currently relational databases. So we have disparate data warehouses, if you will, right? My chemistry data lives over here, my genomic data lives over here, my toxicology data lives over here. And what we wanted to do is bring all of that together, and including all of our unstructured data. So our videos, our PDFs, our Word documents, everything that's unstructured lives in our RDF triple stores. And we wanted to bring all of that together, not into a new super relational database, but rather into a knowledge graph. So we already have constructed an extremely large knowledge graph that extracts the knowledge. So we're no longer talking about the data, right? We're actually getting our data citizens used to using the knowledge. So instead of seeing that a certain experiment happened 8 times, you don't really need to see that. What you need to see is that there's a relationship between A and B. And it has a certain strength associated with that because we have data, raw data, that tells us how strongly those are associated. So we always have a strength between 2 nodes, and we also have a confidence in how confident we are. So once you start to have your data ingestion pipeline actually go from ingesting internal data, external data, publications, patents, anything, anywhere we can get data from, you go through that harmonization, which is extremely important, and it does have some automation. It does have some manual pieces to that. You apply master data management. You get that as clean as you can. You put that data somewhere. Then you extract that knowledge out of it, and you publish it into your knowledge graph. That is absolutely perfect for machine learning at that point, because now you have the knowledge, not just the raw data. So that's how we're tackling bringing all of our data together and really making a sustainable data platform that is machine learning ready.
And how have AI ethics played a role in the development of this platform, or thinking about how to navigate?
Yeah, right. And so in doing so, data governance plays a big role.
Yeah.
Right, and I think we talked about the governance word. But it is very important, right? Not all data is the same. And so there is, at the source level, a permissioning that does carry through. So I may see that there's a relationship, but if I go to see the actual raw data, I may get a decline because in that system, I don't have permissions, and those permissions carry through. So we do have a governance. We have to understand licensing. If it's external data, are we actually able to license that data? If it's clinical data, was there consent to be used in that sort of way? So there is a governance that has to sit on top of that entire data ingestion process. So that cannot be overlooked. Yeah, so that's a good point.
So I think the last topic I want to turn to before we then turn to the audience is what does it look like to be effectively, I guess you guys have touched on this through some of what you've already talked about, but effectively mitigating risks, biases, or potential harms in a more active way, or through system development, again, data development, whatever it may be in your organization. If you'd like to start, yeah.
Yeah, I can start. So in terms of reducing risks, biases, we had to take a very thoughtful approach, and there are two different approaches for risk versus bias. So the source of the bias is typically the data which was used to train that model. That's where the biases come from. And biases come from because certain pieces of data is appearing together, and the models take those correlations as causations. So they got to see the enough data to see that this particular correlation is not a causation. So that's where the biases need to be broken. I know for sure that TransUnion takes our equitable credit scoring very seriously, and we have a dedicated team of people who just works on continuously evaluating our existing models if those models have any kind of a bias. There was a article on NPR like few months back, and it was mentioning that how the credit scoring in 70s, they captured the inherent biases against the racial minorities, and they captured certain factors. And even with the credit score was supposed to be an objective measure of person's credit worthiness, but still it was penalizing ethnic minorities. So credit bureaus have worked very seriously to alleviate this problem of biases. We have an active group which looks at that and tries to remove certain factors and eliminate certain factors. Recently, President Biden announced that medical debt will not be part of the credit scores. All the three bureaus, in fact, have eliminated medical debt of up to $500 from the credit reports, I think 6 months to 1 year back itself, because what they found was that it was affecting certain groups of people more seriously than the others. So that's why they eliminated. So it was kind of a process of removing the bias by analyzing the data. Now, risks is a totally different topic. The risks could be coming from anywhere, from leaking your proprietary data. There was a case about the famous equipment maker, and somebody accidentally put on the source code, proprietary source code into the Git repository, and then they lost $10 million. It was widely published in Wall Street Journal and all. So risk could come from there. Risk could come from having incorrect answers from your models if you are not controlling for hallucinations, etc. So then you provide a wrong answer to your customer, or you take that answer and make a wrong business decision. So that is a risk. So for controlling those kind of risks, you have to look at your models from the beginning and to control what they have been trained on, what kind of output they can provide, what is the risk of leaking the data. You have to have a proper governance process. I know this word was not liked before, but governance is kind of I take it as a process where you got to control the things in order to enable the businesses. This is actually a fault of the leaders, not of the InfoSec teams who do the governance. It is the leaders who don't establish proper matrices for measuring their performances. If you are measuring their performance only on the security incidents they were able to prevent, and you are not measuring on the hurdles they are creating, they will keep creating the hurdles.
Yeah.
So you have to have the proper governance essentially in order to mitigate the risks also.
Thank you. Yeah, so before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from Kevin and Jennifer on this as well, and then I think we'll close the session.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I echo the same risks. I'm not going to repeat them.
Sure.
But I think, let me just spin this one, okay, Wade? Another risk or harm that can come from these is we do have to think about the environmental risk. That is something where there is a human decision making. We do sit in this tension, I say, between could and should. We could do a lot of things. We could train a lot of models, but should we? Right? Are we attacking the right problems where the environmental impact of the energy, the water cooling, what goes into that actually makes sense? So that's just another one out there, and I know one of our North Stars at AbbVie is about decreasing our carbon footprint, decreasing our environmental impact. So it is something where we do think about that as a risk whenever we're thinking about training some of these large models, and is that really where we want to be spending our resources?
I'll touch on generative AI a little bit, just since there's so much talk about that these days. I know there are a number of organizations out there that are blocking access to it, and probably for good reasons in the short term. I've talked to a number of CIOs who are concerned about their intellectual property, going out the door. But I think that's probably a short-term solution and not a long-term solution. And I think with many of the publicly available generative AI models, most of us need to be thinking about a combination of policy, education and awareness. We're also looking at creating enterprise versions of these. And then even within an enterprise version, having the ability to create walled gardens. So it's not just that you have an enterprise version of ChatGPT or Bard or some of these tools, but that the president or CEO's office might have a walled garden, and then there's the Office of Legal Counsel that has their own, and for us, classes that might have their own, researchers that have their own. So the data that gets into those walled gardens isn't also migrating to other parts of the organization. And I think those are things that we need to be thinking about within the organization to create ways to leverage these tools appropriately, but not be concerned about where the data is getting to.
Great. I think we'll wrap up there, but thank you all so much
You're
for your time. And with that, I'll also welcome back up Sarah Pucci to lead our last session.
Oh, no.
Sure, of course.
Close with one final debate. Impedes innovation. So how many people agree with that statement, that data protection impedes innovation? Hands. No one. All right, then I'm going to make you raise your hands on the other side. Okay, we got one. Okay, two. Got a few over here. Okay. And I'll make you raise your hands on the other side because I want to see if you really all agree. Who believes that data protection does not impede innovation? Okay, so then what's happening with everybody else? I'm going to do it again because I want everyone to participate, just at least for the purpose of taking sides. So who believes that data protection impedes innovation? Okay. And who believes that data protection does not impede innovation? All right. Most people don't want to take a stand, but I take your point. All right, so let's start with protection does not impede innovation. Who would like to elaborate on their reasons for their votes? We have one here.
I believe data protection does not impede innovation. It's like a child has a playground to run and play. The streets or the heavy traffic roads are not there. And if you prevent a child from playing on a street and just ask him to play in the playground, that does not impede their ability to learn a sport. Same.
Right, so the walls around it do not prevent what happens inside. Other thoughts on that, or anyone want to make a counter argument on that? Yeah.
I will gladly counter that, saying that if I put too many rules around my child, his mental ability to grow is going to be impeded. So it depends on the degree at which you're putting rules around and walls around, as opposed to you're putting some, and the creativity index, I don't know, I think, I forgot, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but he said the creativity index has gone down. I believe a lot of that is because we have a lot of rules around our knowledge and the interactions that we are having on a day-to-day basis as humans, as opposed to, you know, the carefree days my grandfather lived in. So I will gladly say that there is a lot of impede, you know, when you do put a lot of protections around it.
We have one in the back, I think.
So I would like to say that excess of everything is bad. When we are talking about data protection, I think most of us will say that this is like the reasonable and the needed data protection in order to safeguard enterprise interests. If you are locking down and not allowing any access, that's not data protection. That's like kind of you are shutting down business, basically.
Go back there.
Thank you. Hello. In the last 3 firms that I've worked in, the data scientists that I supported, myself in the data governance role, have all struggled with masking, you know, PII and sensitive information in columns as well as rows. And it got very complex. We had to put policies in place to unmask it, to run the model, to the point where I had to do some research into some tools out there that are being developed for running models in a black box, so that the data and the model could be in a black box without anybody having access to it. It can run, and then you get the results out of it. So that was some of the research that I was doing in previous firms.
And so you're coming down on?
It does. It was impeding. That was my experience, that it was absolutely impeding.
Got one here? We have one here.
I mean, I think impede is the word, not prevent, right? It slows. And to take the child metaphor, by putting the walls around the playground, so to speak, who knows what innovation the child would have in the street? It's not a good idea. It would be a bad, you know, you need to put sense, it's doing it safely, I think is the term we use. And so it impedes, but you need to impede a little bit. We can't be always going full speed ahead with innovation because it is dangerous.
We had one here.
So I kind of agree with the statement that impedes innovation. And I think my reasoning is, with my experience, I'm a data scientist, and with my experience, I feel that similar to the example which was provided, I had situations where hear me now? I'll not repeat. So yeah, I believe in the statement that it impedes innovation. And just to piggyback on the example which was given, that I as a data scientist has come across situations where I cannot use like PI information or financial information, and that constitutes maybe 80% of the data I had. And because the data protection policies in different companies prohibit the use of those, even masking has certain rules, we could not, as a team, build several models. Now, not saying that we should be using personal identification information every time, but there should be good rules of data protection. I think it's very subjective, and we should have the right rules which might not impede the innovation.
Other thoughts?
Maybe just to add to this, Steve Jobs was actually known to have said, people want to know what they sign up for, so just ask them. Some people want to share more, some people sign up for less. Now, again, people can debate this, but I think Apple's been a pretty innovative company in the past couple of decades. And maybe to just add another literary quote to today's agenda, the famous German author Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, I think, was it 18th century, 19th century, had this statement, in the limitations, the master shows himself. In other words, as a data scientist, you want more and more and more and more and more data, but actually you're getting too much data. And actually the less data you have, the more creative you'll be. So if you're really innovative, you'll be able to do with less. By the way, the statement is, believe data protection impedes innovation, not data closure. So it's protecting that. And by the way, finishing off with the kids, get a kid a big gift in a big box for Christmas. What do they end up playing with? Exactly.
You can hear the parents in the room. I'm curious what you think about this idea, and I'll even sort of push on it more and say, to what extent do the limits spark innovation, because you have to work within them, and you have to figure out ways to do that? Is that a valid argument? I'm seeing nods. Anyone want to weigh in on that?
I'll just say yes. I think that's what I thought. Oh,
Sorry, wait for the mic.
I don't really have like a great example, but I am a true believer in when you start to ring fence, you get your best innovation. Sometimes when you have absolute, like, there's just no limit. There's no limit to money. There's no limit to time. There's no limit to resources. That can actually start to stifle innovation. Sometimes having that ring fence and saying, all right, you have this amount of time, this amount of money, this is what you have at your disposal. Start thinking. And then you get really creative and you start to spark that innovation. So I think that that is something that resonates really strongly with me and I think with my team, for sure.
It's like a cooking show. You have these ingredients, you have to work with them. Yeah, exactly. Other thoughts on either side? Yeah?
Does real data actually increase the confidence of your result? That the executives could actually like, oh, I like it because you're 95% confident of your work? Or is it because I didn't give you the right data, so you're only 80% confident? How does that work?
Sorry, wait for the mic. Sorry, our online audience can't hear us unless we have the mic.
So I definitely think that how much confident I am about the results has more weightage than the data. But what I have observed in the past, and this could be anecdotal, that if out of 100% of data, I can just use 20%, it comes down, there's too less data to train the model. And that's one of the problem I have faced. And the other thing which I feel is, yes, you can be super creative with even limited resources, and that's what I think everybody, the data person in the room will agree that we do. But I'm just saying finding better ways to find like masking issue, or can we use something which is like an example of black box given. So if we are shrinking down the data a lot more, and again, this is very subjective, then it questions that, is this protection helping or it is hurting?
I will just say that even if you're 95% sure of the results that you produce, the leader is still going to use their own experience and their gut feeling to make the decision at the end of the day. So it's all subjective.
The right sample size gives you the right confidence, all right? So even if I give you all of the data, which is multi-petabytes of data, it is actually not going to do anything to the confidence level of the end result. I don't think you can train the model with all of the data. I mean, the training set is generally 15-20% anyway. So what is the point of throwing out all the data open to everybody? Does it really help? That was the question that I wanted to ask.
Thank you.
I would like to build on top of what they say. So I think protection is important, right? But definitely there is certain level of protection that you need. Beyond that, it will impede innovation, definitely, right? And everything goes to the use case, right? If we go to the fundamentals, right? If you have the right model with enough data, that's fine. But sometimes you need more data for that model. If you are overfitting, it's because you provide too much data. You don't need that much data. Maybe you can do it with a simple model, right? But there are cases where you need more data. I know about 2 examples. I worked before in Fermilab. Physicists study muon decay and neutrino decay and all those things that are really rare situations or rare experiments. They need tons of data to actually find meaningful results, right? So they use large data sets, right? Another example that I didn't work there, but I read a little bit about it. Maybe Kevin can help us. There is something called Genomics Data Common, which is a project from University of Chicago, where different research facilities on cancer share data about the genomic profile of cancer, patients, treatments, right? It's like a dashboard for the doctors that help them to take the right decisions, because we are really different as humans. We think, oh, same treatment will not work for you or for you or for you, right? It may change. So that's a case where I don't know what they did to mask the data. I don't know the details, right? But if they create a data common, let's say, warehouse for different research facilities in cancer, it means for that use case, more data was necessary. So I think it goes down to the use case. It goes down to principles like, what are you trying to solve, right? Do you have enough data as of now, or you need to expand, right? That's definitely a thing. One example from one of my clients, I cannot mention the whole detail, but we are working with a provider, right? They are providing one model that they already implement, and we have some issues in certain things that the model is not predicting properly, right? The provider I can mention is Microsoft, right? And then Microsoft said, yeah, we can solve that issue if you donate some of your data so we can trade that underlying model, right? And then it has been months still working on our own solution, because that's something that lawyers put like a layer there. No, we cannot provide that data. So definitely you need to adapt, and I think that's why you have data scientists and engineers and people who think about that space problem, the regulations, the restrictions, but there is all levels there where you can add more data or less data, depends, I think. I know it's the answer that you don't like, but depends is, I think, most of the time the answer in these kind of problems.
Yeah, I was just, somebody here mentioned that, that data protection would not impede innovation if it's done with the proper rules, and I kind of agree with that. And I was wondering, wanted to ask the data scientists in the room, what do you think about various privacy enhancing computation techniques, like PECs or PETs, like homomorphic encryption? It's supposed to enable analytics on encrypted data, or differential privacy, or confidential enclaves, all these various techniques that are supposed to enable analytics while keeping your data protected. Has anyone tried it, and what do you think?
Anyone else? Yes, we have one more.
So I have a mixed feeling about this, because I think in theory, I don't believe data protection prevents innovation. But in reality, when it's get to execution, then it does. And it's just because human nature. So from my experience, right, when people want to protect data, in a company, we hold people accountable. It's your job to protect data. And then to be safe, people always err on the safe side. So they always try to make trouble for you. They are reluctant to give people rights. But so, and also on the other side, it's really hard to define like the need and what kind of things are risky. Sometimes it's hard to draw the line. So in a sense, I think maybe it's not a small problem, or it's a complicated problem, but maybe we need to think about, as he said, there's a use case, there's also persona, right? So what role in what kind of cases that can access the data? And I don't think it's easy to draw the line saying that, oh, the less data, you only need the essential. I do have to answer actually a question that I have before, is sometimes when you ask about data quality, right? How do you ensure data quality? Actually, a big part of ensuring data quality is giving you all the access of the data to everywhere there so that you can cross-check. And in that sense, if you have data protection and you have to answer the challenge and be compliant, that's never going to be happen because you're not data scientists, you don't have a use case. But but the only way for me to have a good quality data is cross-check.
We have time for a few more comments. Does anyone else want to weigh in? Explain your stance. No? All right, then I will close us with one final vote. So, same prompt. Who in the room believes that data protection impedes innovation? It's got to be more than 2. All right, so I think we had maybe a few converts. Who in the room thinks that data protection does not impede innovation? Okay. How many people, raise your hand if you feel like your opinions were swayed a little bit by some of the arguments in the room. Even if you didn't totally change your opinion, you heard some things you hadn't thought about. All right. Great. Well, that concludes our day. Thank you all so much for all of your participation and for listening into our panels. Thank you very much to our online audience. And thank you so much to IBM for sponsoring this event today. We have drinks and networking out in the other room, so please find your way out there and continue the conversation and enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.